You hear me now?
I can.
Hello.
Hi.
How you doing, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing all right. Uh, Pleasure to actually finally get to talk to you about it.
Yeah. Sorry I wasn't able to give you more time, but I'd love to hear your argument. So, just for some background, you've been mining in an Orca we'll go with Lifeblood?
I've been mining with an Orca since pretty much when it came out.
Right, but
So
you said you took a break.
I took a break when my daughter was born. You're right. Yes, when my youngest was born, my wife basically forced me off, and
Sure.
I won at E for several years while I raised my child.
What was
But she's
that? What time period was that? Just so we have
oh,
context.
she is turning 10 this year, so I'd say I came back around 3 years ago.
Okay, so 2011 to 2017 there. So
Yeah,
in the prehistory and then in the modern day. Got it. Okay.
right.
So CCP argued that with this latest change, the Orca's mining has actually gone up by like 2%. You disagree?
I disagree.
Okay.
The roll bonus that previously was part of the Orca was taken away because it was an industrial command ship bonus where Rorquals and Orcas got a 100% buff to the drone mining yield. And when they nerfed that for Rorquals, they nerfed that also for Orcas. So based on even just me going out, and I tried it, I did the litmus test of going out the day before and then the day of, and I've gone out since in the Orca. I am not nearly as efficient as I was in any way, shape, or form. And they already
even
admitted
with boost running, even with core running,
with boost running, with core running, with augmented mining drones, where which also they have considerably dropped in value now because of the waste factor.
right?
Like before, I used to mine in Minmatar space. I could clear out a belt a day, just one belt. I was never greedy and went to multiple belts, but I used to clear out a belt a day. I cannot get through half of a belt now in a day. With the core running, bear in mind, of course, you have to shut the core down like every couple hours, move it about 20 kilometers, and then turn the core back on. But I am not pulling that heavy of a yield anymore, and it's because of the fact that when they dropped the drone mining yield buff from the Rorqual, it automatically was also dropped from the Orca. Before, I would get a 100% drone mining yield as part of the roll bonus, and was actually part of the original rollout. And when they took that away from the work, they did something. I thought that was intended, but apparently, according to them, it's not. But by what you're saying,
well,
I'm not getting anything close to that kind of input anymore.
So, are you suggesting that you're not getting the effect of this 15% bonus to drone or mining yield per level of industrial command ship?
So before, you used to get 10% drone mining yield per level plus a 100% roll buff. Now you're getting 15%, but you're not getting the roll buff. So you're only getting 75% of what I'm only getting 25% of what I got before. I'm missing the other 75%.
But isn't your core buffs stronger too? Does that not compensate at least some?
No, unfortunately, it does not. I would love for it to compensate. I do notice a difference when I'm mining with drones, when I have the core on and when I have the core off, but it's not the same yield. I'm not getting the same yield. I'm not burning through rocks as quickly as I possibly could. I was doing, say, 15 to 20 million a day, just mining.
One second. 07 Polynomic, thank you so much for that. 13 months in a row. Awesome. Welcome. Good to see you. Sorry.
Cool stuff.
Proceed.
No, man. Give the shout out to the subscribers. I get
Absolutely.
It, the belts are bigger now, Valamir, but the big thing with the belts is that they increase the belts 300%, but then you also have to factor in waste.
Right. No, yeah, but hold on. You said that you don't get all the way through a belt, but what about the actual rocks gotten through? Have you compared the amount of rocks you made in an hour versus across the board with both?
It's still down, and the value per day has gone down quite a bit. So before, my whole thing was I would And again, my complaints go beyond the Orca, but my big one is the Orca. I used to Orca mine, clear out the belts. I would, use mission loot. I would reprocess that to get the rarer minerals, and then I would build battleships, and I would build cap ship parts. I'd sell battleships at market. I'd sell cap ship parts to a couple of friends I have out in Null or in Low, depending on who wanted it. Or I would build Orcas and freighters for myself, and then I would sell those, and that would be how I would afford Plex and how I would afford new toys. Now, because of the changes in production that require me to gas mine, basically, and also moon mine to get the materials I need to create these parts, I'm not able to readily do that by myself anymore. I was a solo operation for years.
Not to mention the fact that even if you have the moon, you have to react it in either low sec or wormhole space. Or I guess no sec.
But I as a solo player for years, I was always able to basically taking care of myself. Now I am completely, as far as I see it, dependent upon being a part of a core. I have to be a part of a core. And even if I'm part of a core, because I'm a single player account, if I choose to lead a mining operation with the Orca, I am living off the donations of my core members.
Right. Well,
I'm just not turning any kind of, that's why I've stopped mining, and I've started looking at, running abyssals. I've really had to step up my game as far as running missions, but it's all part of it is just trying to make a living in Eve now. As a solo miner is at least impossible from my perspective. I have to completely change my game style, and that's what I've been so angry with CCP about over these months.
So, counterpoint. You don't have to join a corp. You just need to engage with the market, right? Like, you could just you could sell your excess and buy the parts that you need. No corp necessary, right?
I could do that. I tried that. It became not profitable in several areas. I actually, and I think part of it was also because of the place I was living in. I have largely stayed in a Mars space.
Mm-hmm.
The better deals are in Jita. So I could try to move a chunk of my operations to Jita or Caldari space and obviously run afoul of safety and a few others. Or I could try to, like, once a week do a shipment from Jita to somewhere in a Mars space and keep my processes flowing. And I just found that to be too much of a time strain. And anytime I had to use push X for transport, it cut into my profits. So I was automatically taking a little bit more of a loss because I was having to invest more in the market, but I also was paying transport fees.
Right. But okay.
And I agree with Hobby Dungeon.
Convince me this is a bad thing.
It's forcing. I'll say this: an Orca miner went from being able to produce by themselves to basically being a one-job pony in a mining fleet. All I do in a mining fleet is I sit there and I boost. My drones are basically picking up scraps for the time I'm spending basically just sitting there being a boost buffer.
Right.
And it doesn't work for me anymore to mine on my own.
So help me out, though, because it's called an industrial command ship, not a mining ship.
I would agree with you. And one of the things I said originally when I thought about this was, if you don't want it to have either or, you could make it an either or situation. If the core is active, you lose that drone buff, the previous drone yield buff. If the core is unactive, as the core is off, you get your drone buff. You have a choice then. You can choose to be part of a fleet and working your own way through as part of your core, or you can choose to be a solo and you can still maintain your lifestyle. The problem with this is that when they made this change, they just told all the solo Orca players, you're done. You have no alternative at this point. And that's, I think, my biggest problem with this is that there's always, when they do a nerf, they at least buff something else. or at least they try to. Like the big thing now is with the Marauders. The Marauders are the bigger buffer. With this situation where they went ahead and they rightly killed the Rorqual, I'm not going to argue that because their graphs pointed out everything.
Yeah, that was
when they showed
pretty impressive.
When they showed their graphs, but the thing that bugged me is that on one of those graphs there was those 4 breakdowns of Rorqual, mining barge, exhumer, other. Other is the Orca and the Porpoise.
Right.
And
so the problem that I have is that, or the problem that I ran into, and I saw that the mining changes, I was actually surprised that the Orca didn't get nerfed more, to be honest, full disclosure, originally. Because the problem I ran into was I have moons that are being mined, and my miners get ganked or whatever. And so it's like, well, don't be AFK mining or whatever. Or more importantly, I go to there and there's like 6 orcas on grid and they're all just AFK mining. And I'm like, wouldn't this be more efficient to have a mining barge or a bunch of mining barges and an orca? And the response I got was, well, the difference is not sufficient, like isn't so big, and being able to just AFK it for hours is so valuable that just nobody uses mining barges. And I feel like that is a bigger problem, and that would be the thing that they would be trying to solve, right?
I would nerf the hit points on the Orca before, because
but that doesn't fix the problem. That just makes it so that when they get ganked more successfully.
That's correct, but that's the thing is that right now you basically, if you know how to fit your Orca right, nothing besides a fleet of 30 ships or maybe more could take you down in a one-shot situation. It's very hard to gank an Orca in Pysec because of how you can fit it, and it's already large natural buffs. So remove some of those.
My issue there, though, is that when I tell people, hey, why don't you mine in a mining barge? And they tell me that it's better, like we look at the math and it's objectively better to mine in an Orca just because it's basically the same yield. You have way more defense, and the fact that you can do it for a long time with that ore hold, like it just made it so that the Orca was pushing out all of the other mining barges out of their own category.
It's a good point. I'm not going to argue that. It's a great point. It's why I wanted to have the discussion.
Yeah,
I think you would bring that alternate point. But in the same point too, if I look at the stuff that they presented, other ships, and I'm using air quotes even though you can't see me, other ships made up the smallest amount of M3 mined during that entire time. So it's not even that they're going through and ripping it up like a Rorqual did. They're not changing the game like a Rorqual did. They're not completely pushing the balance to one side. It's some people like to do Orca mining. I know a lot of people who still miss it. I know 5 people that all killed their accounts because of it. They just stopped. They just walked away from the game because that was their play style. And it wasn't even that we sat in belts and did nothing all day. We were actually like working on manufacturing. We were doing a bunch of different things. We were doing PI, we were doing manufacturing, we were doing research, stuff like, we could be doing other things while we're there. I agree that I would love it if there was a way to not have someone just drop their ship in the middle of a belt at the start of a day and then walk away for 4 hours and just let it just do its thing. I wish there was a way to not do that. But to knock out a perfectly viable playstyle for solo miners, because a small fraction of this group is abusing the privilege, kind of stinks. When we took the pain, we had to really rip the spine out of a Rorqual because everybody was abusing it.
Right.
There wasn't anyone that was following the rules by it.
So it's funny because it's kind of interesting because I made a video on the other side of these changes when the Rorqual was being quote unquote buffed originally, because my friend argued a very similar thing, which is that the Rorqual went from something that you have in a POS and boost out all day to something that you take into a field and mine with, and so very few people actually used Rorquals and all that stuff, and there's a lot of people convinced that nobody would use a Rorqual even after the changes because of this. But my friend's point is that he saw himself as a foreman. He ran a mining organization. And so his ability to provide these boosts to his friend was like that was his gameplay. And so, like it or not, the Rorqual got objectively better, but his gameplay died completely. And I even at the time said that while, and you can watch it, it's an older video about the Rorqual changes.
Yeah, look it up.
But I talk about how while this change is necessary, it is unfortunate that it necessitated the killing off of a playstyle, and that CCP should do something to restore the concept of the foreman. And I personally believe that the Athanor does that, right? Now an organization can have their own belts, and that's the reason why you mine for this group as opposed to a different group. And that's cool. But again, we seem to be at that point again where, okay, if you're going, we can all accept that the Orca was out of control before, or maybe we can, but if it does need to be reined in, then what happens to all these people that were holding on to orcas that expected to be able to do that? What is their solution? And the results that have been given by CCP seem relatively unsatisfactory. And so I don't know if it's that they need more passive income gameplay or they like whatever happens, but it does seem interesting that every single time CCP makes major mining changes, they kind of shrug emoji about destroying an entire way of playing when that seems to be a much bigger deal in other aspects of the game. Right?
I think I think it is one of the reasons that there is a significant player drop is people are not going to renew an account if all it does is just sit there in a belt and basically is a rock that pulses every 2 minutes.
Right.
And I think that was one of the things that's hurting them. It's not the only thing. Obviously, I'm not going to say, oh, the world is ending because the Orca got done. But do you have to go? I know you said you had to go soon. It's 5 o'clock.
Soon, yeah, pretty soon. Like
so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great conversation, and I'd love to continue it, but I don't want to make you late for stuff. But I think I've done what a couple of people have suggested, and I've tried that. I've gone in as a retriever. I've taken that down step, and that was the other thing too that really bugged me was I trained up mining drones, I trained up industrial command ship, I trained up all the possible things that I would do to buff this thing, and it's gone. It's basically worthless. It's a giant paperweight right now, where it's a giant hauler if I'm alone. But I've done the work of a retriever, and I'm alone. I am docking up so much more often.
Right.
I mean, it's almost like every 10 minutes I have to dock up and dump.
Yeah, no. I've done Mackinac and retriever mining, and it's the idea of like, oh yeah, you've got this giant cargo bay. Unless you have compression support too, it's not that giant. But no. What I think honestly is really missing here, I've thought about this before, which is that our surveying gameplay sucks. Right? Like the fact that there's just a survey scanner that tells you where everything is and there's nothing that makes things more efficient or whatever. Like, even during the compression changes and all that stuff, I said that, it should actually increase the amount of yield rather than reduce the amount of yield because they have sophisticated processes that are able to extract more resources out of the same rocks, or, there's some sort of way for you to be doing surveys to find, increase the value of the rock in some mechanical way, that therefore the Orca would have a new job, which is, managing the actual fleet, looking for opportunities, telling people where to go, dealing with the compression. Like the problem is that there's just no active gameplay or gameplay at all for the Orca. In a world in which we're trying to get more and more away from AFK, the idea that basically it's okay to just sit there and be a booster seems, I'm going to go with disrespectful to you as a player, right? Like that's my job. My job is to sit there. I don't think that's gone very well at all. But I think that the solution is some sort of like surveying mechanic.
Surveying mechanic, or to do something where if the core is not active, you can switch modes. Like
Yeah.
you could turn it into like a larger miner, or if you want to be that fleet booster, you can activate the core, and then from there you are not going to get the buffs that you did before. So at
Right.
least it gives you the options.
Yeah, and I agree that you could do it that way for sure. I don't like the idea that it's the problem I saw isn't is the fact that the Orca and these mining barges are competing for the same space, right? Like they have the same design space in the world. They both mine, and therefore they will be compared apples to oranges or apples to apples with each other. So there needs to be some sort of incomparable, but at the same time that incomparable needs to give the Orca something, the Orca player, something to do that makes them feel valuable as a player, not just as an account.
Yes. That's kind of really one of the things that just bugs me a lot is that there is no value anymore to this giant machine other than the fact that it's a floating compressor.
Yep, I don't like any situation where you say, okay, well, I'm going to bring this dude as this committed character. And it's like, oh, no, no, no. We use alts for that. Like anything that gets relegated to alts, I think should die.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for coming on and you know, working that through with me. Sorry it took so long for us to touch base, and I'm sure I'll keep thinking about this and chewing on it for a little while. There definitely is something there, regardless, because
Yeah.
like I said, it feels sucky.
I appreciate the opportunity to just discuss it because it's like I said, I've been flying it a long time. I kind of lived in the damn thing for a few years
Right.
in Minmatar space. So I understand that CCP wanted to get out of the AFK mining quite a bit, but I think they went ahead and ruined it for a lot of other people. Myself especially. That was my play style. I have no idea why. I just found it fun, but I found it fun. I've been trying to find different ways of making money since missions are boring and abyssals get repetitive, and you know, I know exactly what they're going to be. I know exactly where they're going to be, where they are and what they are, and I know exactly how much I'm going to make an abyssal. It kind of kills it for me after a while.
Well, I think that we need to have a follow-up at this point because I am very interested in really digging into how mining is interesting and missions in Abyss are boring. But I think we're going to have to save that for another day. I appreciate you talking. Oh, that is the indication that I do have to go. So give me 1 second and I will be taking care of that.